My guest today has hired many art directors and has let go of a few. He's a well known name in the game industry and is among the few executives I know who understand the game art function very well. It's Mishka Katkov on our podcast today, and we'll be asking his thoughts about what studio heads look for when hiring art directors. Let's go. Hello and welcome. It's a very special episode today because I'm meeting Mishka Katkov. Mishka, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Shiraz, for welcoming me to an art podcast. Am I your not? I'm your first not art friend to be on the podcast.
Yeah, but the topic is such a special one for me. It's really important for, especially for leaders, and I just want to talk about it. But how about like I start with a little introduction and then we
Sure.
get to the questions. All right. So Mishka is from Helsinki, from Finland, and he's a game industry veteran with executive roles including product manager, studio head, managing director, advisor, and investor. Mishka had worked with companies like Rovio, Supercell, OnePlus, Zynga, Digital Chocolate, and more. And Mishka has also founded Savage Game Studios, which is now owned by PlayStation. Mishka is founder of Deconstructor Fun podcast, and he's also my ex-boss from my days at Rovio. So we go back, and I think I recorded my first podcast episode with you when I came to Deconstructor Fun. So this is such an honor doing one with you this time.
Oh, it's an honor to be on this podcast, and also kudos to you and congratulations on all the growth that you've gotten after starting the podcast and the YouTube series. Because it's very hard. The market is extremely saturated. There's new podcasts coming in every day, but you've been really hitting it off like really, really well. So congratulations on the early success and all the success that will follow.
Thank you so much. It actually, to be very honest, it sometimes like feels a bit of responsibility as well, because sometimes I get to hear from some people that, hey, I listened to a couple of your episodes and that made me change my mind, and I'm thinking of quitting this job and doing something entirely different, like shifting their role from, if they're in a leadership role, to going more hands-on, stuff like this. It just puts you into a spot where you feel so much of responsibility towards the community, but I'm happy that people are finding it beneficial. So thank you so much.
You should add like one of those disclaimers that they do is financial podcast. Like, this is not a financial advice, and you should just like, this is not a career advice disclaimer, and then go about it so you don't have to feel responsible.
Totally. But why you are here? So you have such a big executive background, being on the leadership positions from working in the gaming industry, and me being an artist. So first of all, like, I want to understand from you, what kind of expectations do people like you have from people like us who are the art directors, basically? So could you detail out your typical expectations and understandings, or what makes an effective art director?
Yeah, that's a good question. On a high level, art director is a person who sets the visual guidelines of your games. And that way, it's a very, very important role, and more important in certain genres, less important in others. But if we go through like the basic things, like what you're expecting from an art leader, art director to do is setting a unique artistic vision. Like, you have to have your game stand out of the others. You're expecting the person who comes in to understand game development. I'm sure you worked with people who are excellent artists, but are coming in from another industry, usually animation, sometimes from creative industries, and the lack of understanding in development process is quite a challenge, especially if the person is working in a leadership role. You're looking for adaptability, and that is because a good art director, in my opinion, is a good business partner. So that person also is interested in the market and the business side of things, and not just the art team and putting in their unique artistic vision. And that adaptability means that you can talk business elements with that person, and the person is able to digest them and adapt his or her approach to team, so that the team is well suited for the business targets, not only artistic targets. You're also looking for a collaborative approach. Quite often, this is a specialist role that drives their specialist organization. And so if you have people who are less collaborative, they tend to create these art islands that are doing their own thing, and it might be really, really beautiful. But then again, it creates challenges sometimes working with other leaders in the company or in the studio, be they technical, product design, etc. Um, you're looking for a person who has a network and a following. This is, again, my personal opinion. As a leader, I'm expecting the art director to build a team. And building a team is more than just working with a recruiter. The people who can build best teams are those who are known in the industry and who have a great following, because they are able to connect with that network, either bring people directly from that network or leverage that network for other candidates. And that is one of the key elements if you're bringing in if you're building up your studio, or you're changing the way you want the studio to move. Of course, there are different situations where you're just replacing an existing art director, and then in that case, the network might not be that important of a role. And finally, you're looking for a person who has love for games. This is a creative business, and you're looking for a person who plays other games, and you can have that conversation inside the studio, really about game development and different type of games and their love of games. So really come down to unique artistic vision, understanding game development, adaptability, collaborative approach, love for games, network, and following. So that's kind of the thing.
That makes total sense. But for example, if I have to just stretch out whatever an art director can possess and have to do in a day-to-day basis between one companies and whatever, there can be so many attributes, like, for example, being hands-on, not hands-on, specialist in visual development, maybe more into the later stages, like a technical art director. And also, for example, someone who knows career development and even budget planning for the studio and stuff like this. So is there something that you really require as a must-have versus like a good-to-have versus like it's no need, like it can be left on to the better specialist from some other craft? Like, for example, if you don't know monetization or user acquisition or marketing, those things can be left with some other people.
Of course, well, they should be left with some other people. That is the part of the collaborative approach, that the person is like, and the adaptability. So the person is actually interested in the business side and collaborate with other leads. But you're absolutely, of course, you are correct. The way I see it is, you need different people from different phases, just like with all the game development. You need certain type of programmers in the beginning of the project, and you definitely don't want to have them towards the production or live operations, like the prototyper types. Same thing goes with art directors, in my opinion. So in the beginning, I would, like, let's say, well, there's beginning of game development process or games, and then there's the beginning of studios. So those are a little bit two different things. But let's kind of jam them all together. Let's say you're starting off and you don't have an art director yet. You might have an artist or two, and you're scaling up the studio. You might be off the prototyping phase and kind of moving on to the next one, and you want to really start building the art direction, or it could be your first art hire even. At that point, you're looking for somebody whose skills are more on the visual development side, somebody who has rather concept or illustration background rather than production background, or the worst is graphical design background. So you're looking for somebody who can set up vision, and of course that person, in my opinion, needs to be a drawer, because first of all, they can guide the direction, and they can build a team of very interesting visual development and concept artists who can push the envelope and really find that style. Secondly, these people tend to have a pretty good reputation in the network, because they produce a lot of content through sketches and concepts and so forth. So they can bring a lot of interest. And thirdly, it's what would I put it? So I almost got so I'm thinking about you. Let me put in the concept of when we brought you on in Rovio. So we were in a situation with the studio that we were developing a certain type of games, and we wanted to move to different type of games, and we were exploring different directions. So there was a lot of variability in the studio, and we had art directors before, but they didn't have the right type of background. There was a very much lack of concept artists. There was no visual development artists, no illustrators, no nothing. And so a lot of it was very production based, very 3D based, very graphic design based, but none of it was concept side. So bringing you aboard was definitely you having a versatile background. So you were able to look at different genres and have a direction towards that genre and ability to take it. You had a great, and you still have bigger and bigger following. So I knew that you can bring other artists aboard. And you had also interest and passion towards building your own team. So that is something that is very important in the early side. And that was the third thing that I was thinking about. So interest towards building a team. And it's not always in that phase, but you're really looking for somebody who understands the business side and can build the team along it. And also by team building, I mean, get rid of some people who are not suited for this path and then bring on people who are more suited for it. But then again, if you're looking for a studio that is already has a live games and maybe their art director left or is moving to a different phase or is not suited for that phase, then you're looking for somebody who not necessarily even have a concepting background. I would probably look at that stage, somebody who has very good in production background, has an excellent relationship with various different studios from art outsourcing to even marketing and creative studios. Somebody who has worked in live operations, who knows how the process is run, who can run a tight train of updates, can build all the elements through it and can support other functions, be their community, be their marketing, and is very much a business focus. This person, listen, I don't need this person even to have the Waco board. Like they're all about managing the artist. They're all about managing the process. They have a good taste, but most importantly, they are very scalable. So they can find internally people who can take drive. They can find external studios and they're very flexible, very business oriented. So totally different background. And I would argue that you switch these people around, they would fail in their respective roles, and then you switch them back, they would excel in those roles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So everything that you said here related to how an art director would handle their team, it connects me and makes me curious about the culture. So every game studio or every game company, they try to create a culture into a definition that this is our mission, this is our how we work. Maybe it could be based on how they have worked in the past, or maybe they do a big pivot on like setting their mission statement by doing some sort of like an offsite exercise and agreeing on some keyword that you could put on some t-shirts, and then deciding that this is how everyone will work in our, like, this is the attitude of the people in our company. But in the case of artist and art director, do you let them choose the way they want to work with the art team, which can be different from the overall company's attitude? Or should they really align on the same values and the, let's say, like the aggression or whatever, which is aligned to the other stuff? And by saying culture, I just don't mean to say some sentences that you can't make meaning of. It's more about like even the attention to detail versus how iterative you go, or for example, even running like a sprint versus not sprint. So some developers really prefer like, hey, we want to have everything on Jira, every tickets are marked over there, there's a big checklist. But maybe in the case of art lead, they want to decide that, no, I can't work with Jira. My artist cannot understand this, and I'm not going to have this kind of 2-week sprint. We're going to go with more like waterfall, whatever. Or maybe we won't have dailies in the morning. I require these mornings to be where artists just sit and create work. So we will not have the same typical tradition as what everyone is doing in the company.
It's a very good question. Culture is never static. I think that's a good thing to add, because it changes, especially as new leaders come in, and it's definitely, we worked at multiple different companies. Stated values of a corporation has something to do with the cultures of the teams, but usually less than more. And that's why I think I would approach it from this perspective. An art director is the business partner of the game director, or just like a studio art director is the business partner of a head of studio. And in this sense, alignment is the most important part. So if we're all working, we have a good team, we're all collaborating, we understand the business targets, we understand the market, then we should be able to align on how our respective teams work. What is the most efficient way of working to achieve the goal? And so it shouldn't be about whether our team uses Jira or not. And then there's a producer who really wants everybody to be on Jira because X, Y, and Z. And then it becomes a battle about a tool, which makes very little sense. It has to be about the business objectives. Maybe there is a critical business objective where full transparency is so important that it's mandatory. Well, in that case, the art director probably should have a producer, and then it's not on the side of the art director to update the Jira, but the art director, there's an art producer who's working in, and that is reporting maybe even like in Matrix to the head of production, and through that we achieve the both. We get the transparency that they need on the other side of the aisle, but at the same time it doesn't hinder the ways of working of the art team because there's just an extra resource and a tool is being updated. They can still use other tools, but at least there's this one tool that links them to the rest of the organization. And I think a lot of the times what happens is that game directors and studio directors and everybody makes mistakes when hiring art directors and giving them too much autonomy, meaning that not even autonomy, too much independence, where it goes against the targets of the studio. And they're like, well, this person is just such a magnificent art director. The artists love them, so let them do whatever they want. That's also a very bad situation because you are creating essentially a separate team that will do kind of whatever they want because the art director shields them from all the rest, and they only hear and see the art director and becomes the cult of personality. And you've seen studios that work that way, and it creates a rift between art and the rest of the teams, and that also is not nice. So you kind of have to have both. You have to have that adaptability, that ability to be a partner. And you saw even the changes with the culture. Like when you joined our studio at Rovio, the culture changed. Like the art team culture was absolutely different than before you joined. And we aligned on that culture. We discussed multiple times. You asked many things. It was transparent to me what you're trying to do, and I supported all the actions that you took. And so in that sense, the culture was changing. The art team had the autonomy, but at the same time, there was full transparency of where the art team is going and why.
Right. I really enjoyed something on what you said on the last part, where not giving the complete independence, but at the same time, balancing it with the company's mission and the game project mission. Something I want to know from this decision making and the ownership of the decision making. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you are creating a game where you are constantly talking with the marketing leads, with the CI. You are constantly observing the data, and then the data is pointing to going in a, let's say, like a realistic direction for your game. Okay, and then you have just recently hired a very senior and experienced art director who is very capable, has some projects in the past where their style was completely inspiring for the game, and that art director comes into your team, and then he or she mentions that, hey, let's maybe pivot this into a stylistic direction, or maybe something even more casual, like let's say Brawl Stars, Animal Crossing style. And they have their own valid argument about the logics on why they think this can work, and they maybe can impress you with the good amount of key art as well in order to show you what it could look like. Whereas everything else that you wanted to do from your point of view of understanding the market or looking at whatever, you feel that this is a bit more unsafe proposition. So how do you handle this kind of like decision making? That can you leave it onto the art directors to let them decide how they should approach, or they really need to align with whatever your gut feelings are saying?
Well, that's a good question. So I would again use a framework. So it's usually better to be transparent in this type of decision making, and even take the concept of an art director away and just say any director you have in your team. And when you're thinking about what type of a game a studio or a team should be making, there are really four components that should influence this. One is, what do we want to make? What is everybody excited about? Because that influences a lot. Like, let's say we would make a puzzle game, and the art director has always been in action games. Might be excited, might not be. So we have to figure that one out. The second one was what we can do. And here you mentioned that you have an art director that is excellent, great, team loves him or her, and they have this type of a style. Every art director has their style, and this is their style. And we can do this style, but we can't do the other style because they don't have that style. And so it doesn't work in a way that you just replace this art director who is beloved by the team, who has built the team to execute against one specific style. And you could just like, well, nah, we're going to go to a different direction. You can do that. Very risky move. But essentially, you're saying, we will change the whole art team. Expensive, risky, takes a long time. So always thinking about what is it that you can do, where are you good at, and build around those. The number three is, what do players want? So you mentioned market many times. That is one of the four components that you have to be looking at. And the fourth one that people less think about is what gets funded. Because when you combine what you can do as a studio, what you want to do as a studio, what the market, aka the players want, then the combination of three gets funded. And so in this, it's again about the teamwork. Let's work together. We have, our director is excellent in this direction. Let's try different variations of their style where they're still comfortable, where they can explore and find what works better in the market than, let's say, the first try against the fully realistic one. So again, it's a joint project. I wouldn't work like market is not the truth, because you're doing tests and quite often you can do something that is, market is suggesting you go that way, but that's usually incremental improvement. Usually the best things are the ones that are coming totally out of left field. And that is the creativity. And so that's what you want. But in the end, yeah, just keeping those three in mind, always using tests, always de-risking, having a strong creative vision, aligning that vision with game director, and if what the art director is good and they can prove it, which they can because it's good, they can do various tests. Then I don't think there will be challenges to finding a common ground.
Mm. I know that you are a great negotiator. By working with you, I've seen that you are very easily, or even if not easily, you are toward the end, you are able to influence or maybe get the answers for the people who are trying to bring you some challenges or differences in opinion as compared to what you thought at first. So what I want to know from you is, has there been any experience in your past where you had a certain art director who had a very different creative opinion, which was in disagreement to how you thought it? And then how did they approach convincing you? So essentially, it's like a situation where in the beginning you don't align with that person. For example, you are against, and it's not about just the look and feel for the game. It could be anything like, hey, we should not work on the app store images for now. Maybe we should just fix on the core gameplay, or for example, we should think about the base, we should think about the meta, whatever. And then the art director says that no, we should first of all try to answer this, because only after doing this I will manage to get answers for everything else visual, for example. So is there any example in your past where you can recall a moment where you had a director with a very different creative opinion as compared to you, and then what tools did they use in order to negotiate and make it more healthy conversation where you agreed with them?
Yeah, so you know, and I think you have this in the intro. I've fired many art directors and hired also many. And I'm meaning that when I fired art directors, it wasn't that they were bad art directors. They just weren't able to complete the role anymore, or we weren't able to work together. And the situations where we are not able to work together is where you're bullheaded and you're holding down the entire production of the game and you're unable to explain what you're doing and why. You can say any kind of a process, like there's not one right process. You can explain, we're going to do this first and then that and then this, and then we're going to get here. Okay, how long does it take? All right, what do you need, and so forth. We just discussed the process. Now everybody aligns in the process. Let's do that. You can't just be like, we're going to do this for as long as we want, and we're going to change things around, and you can't influence what we're doing. That doesn't work either, because you have to understand that there are business realities. We have to show visual progress first and foremost, because before we can show a lot of progress on the build side, it's very helpful in startups as well as in scale-ups to show the visuals, get people excited inside the team and outside the team. So kind of going through the art directors that I parted ways with. One key reason has been is that they lacked game development experience. So those are usually the ones that have graphical design backgrounds. You know that there are art directors that somehow become art directors without being great drawers, having the technical competence to be great, 3D or animation or technical artists, nor having game development experience where they're good at production, and they just somehow become art directors. And the issue there is that they don't have the competence of any of their artists, so they don't get the respect from their artists other than their title. And all the artists are asking, like, how come this person is art director when they're not that good of an artist? And they will have problems with competent game directors or studio heads because they're unable to explain a process or guide the process very effectively. So that's number one where I tend to part ways. I think most number one reasons have been is that somehow I've ended up working with an art director who has a graphical design background, and all kudos to them. But in my opinion, they are just not as good as somebody who has 10 years, 15 years of experience of working as a part of an art team and not a graphical design team. The other ones are I've had to part ways with great art directors who are very strong on the visual design side, who were able to build a team, who were set a direction and just fantastic at starting projects. They had tremendous problems of scaling the team because they were so hands-on, so directive, and a lot of the messages that was coming from the team as they got past the first creative stage into production is that they weren't able really to put their input, but the person was so creative, so strong, that felt like, no, like, great ideas, boys, but this is how it's done. And so that creates first a tension inside the team. And then the second part of the tension is that person does not want to be tested, does not want to run market tests, does not, like, people don't understand, I'm doing my thing. And so the risks keep climbing. The team gets, antagonistic against their own art director. And usually that runs dry pretty quickly, because at the moment when the test actually happens and it's not working, there's going to be some sort of an explosion where they don't like the process and they don't like the team. They're like, screw all of you, and they just walk away. So great starters, not a great production people. And then the last part of art directors that I have also trouble working and I don't like in the studios are the ones who build cults of personality. So they are the ones that have a background of some of the key franchises, and whether in animation or in games, and they build their art team into a silo. They use the processes and the ways of working that they used before, and feel that makes them immune to any kind of criticism or need to collaborate with others just because they've been on a successful project and this is how it was done. And they silo the art team from the rest of the team and begin producing art and work that is not compatible, and that becomes quite of a challenge, and it creates a rift inside a leadership team. And so in those cases, even though that person has such a fantastic background and is good at hiring people, but I would rather, in hindsight, in many ways, and even in those situations, I would rather have somebody who's collaborative, adaptive, team player than a diva.
Mm-hmm. And what are your tools to solve the problems between the misalignment between the art director and the art team? So I'm sure in many occasions in your past, you might have had some artists who are directly approaching you and telling you that, hey, I don't like this art director, for example, for whatever reason, like the way the person manages or whether the person can inspire or whatnot. um, how do you validate whether these artists are correct and not the art director, or vice versa? And is there something that you basically like directly talk to the art director and try to make that person solve the issues, or what are your tools? Because artists are very emotional and sensitive, right? So how
Yes.
do you handle those situations?
They are very emotional and sensitive. That's true. I will never go to an art director and say, "Hey, some of your teammates don't like you." That is that's not right. Those are just messages. Those are just points that I'm like, okay, interesting. Still, the art director is my business partner, not the individual artist in the team. And there have been situations like I remember clearly at a certain studio. We're staying a bit late, and the concept artist, it was just me and the concept artist late at the studio, and I think I asked something and just said like, "Hey, that's a nice thing you're drawing," and we were just talking this and that, and she asked me like, I don't know what was exactly how we end up, but she asked me like, can I be honest? I was like, of course. And she's like, well, I know you and the art director are friends. And so like, I'm just a concept artist. Like, you know how it is. I was like, but please. And then she would tell me that he's not good at drawing. Like he's actually bad. And as an art director, he's bad. And then I had the sense because there were issues, a lot of issues. And then when finally somebody has the courage from the art team, somebody from the concept side, and we are doing concepting at the moment, and there were a lot of red flags. And then that was one of the key red flags that came in of like, hey, this person does not know what they're doing. I'm a good concept artist. He doesn't know what he's doing. So that was kind of like it wasn't the straw that broke the camel's neck, but that's one of the examples that would come in, and I would need other elements to come in because oftentimes artists can complain about the art directors. Even they've complained about you, Shiraz, you know that. And I was like, okay, I trust him. So what? Like, thank you for your feedback. I'm not going to say I trust him. I'm like, thank you. This is valuable feedback. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, he's doing excellent work. If that art person doesn't want to work here anymore, doesn't fit that they feel fit Shiraz's team, they can leave. It doesn't change anything because I trust Shiraz to deliver on everything. So that's normal way of operation. But if there were things that are coming late and there's this, there's that, there's multiple signals, and I hear artists talking that they don't like working on it, then that message has more carry. But in terms of negotiation, it's artists and art directors need to understand that their failure is the failure of the game director and the studio head. Like when it comes to taking ownership of a failure, meaning that the game is not working or the game is not shipping and so forth, it always goes back to whoever is in charge, and that person in charge will carry the consequences. And the way it works is you have to fix those, and if you're unable to fix them as a head of studio, for example, then it's going to be your head that rolls, not the art director's head. It's going to be your head. So negotiation is around the objectives, understanding what we're doing and why. And if the art director does not like working in certain ways, then there's no point in continuing the negotiation because it is the responsibility of the game director or of the studio head to make sure that this project ships on time, on quality, to the players it was intended to be accepted by. So, yeah, that's kind of the negotiation part. Work as a part of a team or don't work.
Mm-hmm. Right. I recall one of the very early conversations when I met you for the first time, and we were talking about this, and I felt that I align so much with how you think on one matter, and I'm going to bring that up. So, you believe that when you are starting a studio, for example, or starting a company, you don't like to suddenly promote someone to be the art director without even building an entire team. And I completely resonated with you on this because what if you are just for now seeing a very narrow team set, like two people, and then you think one is the senior, so maybe that person can become the art director. But then you scale and hire, and you realize that this person is not capable, and then you think that you have to now put another leader who can actually manage a dozen of people and fulfill the values. So how are these kind of like organizational changes like handled on your end, where you feel that we went with some mistakes by setting up the art team in a certain way, but now our strategy is changing, our company is growing, or it's changing and turning differently, and we now need to put in another person into this role and have to explain the first person that, hey, now this person will be your lead, and he or she will handle your role, and now you go back to this. So these kind of like role changes, how are they communicated overall from your side with the people you work with?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It happens with others positions as well, not within the art. There was when things happen, when people get field promoted, that's what it's called. So, and when the team actually scales, it's untenable. Like having an art director that is not, or any kind of let's say senior 3D artist who's actually not that senior, or a lead artist who actually does not have any leadership capabilities, or even willingness to do that. They create bottlenecks in your organization, and at worst, what happens is you begin hiring more leads and more seniors, and that creates the sort of like too much of a hierarchy, too much of a reporting, which you don't want to have in a studio, because it slows everything down. So I would approach it from the perspective of clarity, just informing everybody, hey, we're resetting these things. And they can be quite upsetting for many people, because if you are a director and you suddenly are not a director, that can cause people to leave, even though there's no impact on the salary. And usually they're in, like, we move person to another position, from lead to an individual contributor, same salary, but still there might be some bad feelings there. So like, what can I say? It's you have to be very clear of why you're doing this, and it's not personal, and it's going to be better for the person in the right position, and then drive those changes, because otherwise the expectations are going to be so high that the person is going to fail, and they will be fired because they are unable to operate in their position, because they don't have the necessary skills and experience to do that. So yeah, it's clarity, but I'll be honest, like, it usually quite often ends up in people leaving. So I would prioritize in those situations hiring of a very good manager, where the person can understand by interacting with that new art director, like, oh my God, like, this person is like 7 years ahead of me in the career. I can learn so much in this position. I'm blessed to be able to stand back a little bit, learn from this person, and become an art director in next few years, rather than get get angry that I'm not the art director, and they promised me that I was an art director when there were 5 people, and now there are 15 artists or 25 artists, and they hired this new person. It's like, am I not good enough? How are the people looking at me? Like, no, I think it's just perfectly normal to say, hey, this moved faster than expected. I want to step back. I want to learn from this new. I'm going to support this new person, and it helps my career. And it's a good thing, not a bad thing, to be able to do that, rather than leave the company, go to another company to become an art director, and fail at that because you never were able to learn from the person that joined.
Mm-hmm. And what are your expectations from art leaders towards evolving mindset? Because there's like so much of transition happening in how stuff gets done. In the last couple of years, there had been AI, and AI has been helping many people to make art. But there are very polarized opinion about whether it should be used or not, and all those things exist. And between all of this, like the game developments are constantly changing. The art leaders are getting hired. So, do you, from your end, expect that the art director should be adopting to these kind of like transitions and changes which are happening, or you just generally recommend more of like an old school methods on how people are working? What's your take on that, like overall?
Why do you think there's an AI component coming in? Like, what are the reasons for AI being implemented so heavily into different processes, art included?
Well, as of now, the intentions for those tools are mostly towards like creating the work and making work more easier. So it's like building more efficiency, and whatever like it took like so many months and years is now probably being able to be done in weeks and stuff. But the problem is like the um, I mean, we still do not know correctly on how like the AI is actually creating content for people. It like if you look at some of the art portfolios, many of the styles and whatever are being borrowed without the consent of the people, and therefore there's like an emotional, sensitive feeling among the artist overall. Now, for example, if you bring in an art director and that person says, "Yeah, like, hey, let's use AI here because it can save up our time for creating like a mood board or maybe like defining the style for the game," can create four splash screen very quickly, and then we can decide which direction should we go for. Um, but that goes very against the values of many artists in the team because they are like, no, I mean, this work which is coming from AI is being used from another person's artist, and it's also like I don't think the artists are worried about their job being cut off or probably like them being underpaid, but there's still like an emotional component about whether it's ethical to use AI, and in those cases, there's always like a bit of tug of war between these two different opinions. And I'm not sure whether like the studio leads, like, are they thinking that they should adopt AI and they should bring in our directors who are supporting this, or they are still thinking from the same emotional values as what the artists are thinking right now.
So whether you're asking whether studio heads who are in charge of profit and loss,
exactly,
or charging the profit of loss, would be thinking that this could significantly decrease the cost and increase the speed of a certain process where we've previously used, let's say, art outsourcing as well as internal team. And now we can move faster and get into the development by just speeding through visual development because we get so many ideas so fast that we can iterate on. Do you think studio heads would be emotional when looking at numbers?
Well, no, I don't think so.
I think they are when it goes to the other direction, when somebody would say, hey, let's do it let's rather be slow and more expensive than fast, because the other one is ethically correct. And then when it comes to ethics, I very much understand ethical conversation. I wouldn't say this is at the forefront of all the ethical conversations happening in the world. It might be very important for an art director, but we're talking about tools. And in my opinion, tools shouldn't be used just because they're new and for the sake that they are new. There has to be a reason. There has to be a reason for usage of this tool. If AI speeds up ideation, which leads to less cost, then absolutely you need to use that tool. And if your art director is fully against that and cannot provide a comparable way to operate, like cannot, there are ways to move fast. And then maybe they have the right type of artist, they have the right type of sketching mindset, they do right type of work, and that results in original content that is created fast and is beautiful and so forth. But if they can't change their operation models and they don't want to use the technology that your competitors are using, then you're at a disadvantage. And then you can be held hostage by your art director, or you can chase the art director. That's just purely business. I sound very harsh, but and I am in many ways, but I'm also very adaptable. If we were able to work effectively together, I don't want people to understand that I'm this like yes or no type of a person. Like I can be convinced that hey, we're gonna do this sketching thing, we're gonna do these type of process, and trust me, it's gonna be a great result. And you explain that to your art team, like, hey, guys, AI can do this, but we don't have to use it if we can come up. And the art team is like, yes, we can do this. Let's do rather this, and we can deliver it. And then the art team gets behind it, and boom, you came up with a new process, the original, really cool. Everybody's happy. Of course, that's the best way to work, rather than forcing the art team to use a specific tool. But nevertheless, the goal has to be the same, the business goal. Our competitors are using this, they're moving faster. How can we solve this? We can use these tools, or we can change our process, or we can do both in some kind of a hybrid mode. But that is the business goal. I'm not going to force anybody to use a tool. And I'm also oftentimes, as a person who has to sign for all kinds of contracts, I've had artists come with me like with the Houdinis to build procedural system in 3D. Like, do we really need this? At the same time, I'm also like shooting down a lot of different tools that artists may want to use, because to me, they feel not needed. I would talk to multiple different people and they would say, no, this is too much for the type of game you're making. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to pay for this. Doesn't make any sense. We can do this in other ways than using a specific tool. Same thing goes with the AI. So always, business objectives ahead. And that's why the art director has to be a business partner as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. My last question is about discovery. So I believe the executives are not looking at ArtStation and they're not scrolling through portfolios and stuff.
I was.
So how do art directors get noticed by studio leaders, and like how should they connect with those people, or do someone recommend you and this is how you hire art directors, or is there someone in your address book? Basically, what's the way in order to get visible into your radar?
Yeah. So again, first it starts with the needs, and the needs come in with your phase, whether you're starting off, whether you're in production and so forth, and that kind of sets the job description of the art director as well as the expectation. You also have to be very clear on, in terms of needs, is what kind of a games are you making? So a person can be a fantastic art director, but if they haven't done a first-person shooter games before, they'll probably stumble quite a lot. Like they will miss these sort of a details that you would have. Like, like in a gun, in a in a first person shooter, it shows, like, there's usually like the ammo that it shows on the gun, which makes no sense. Like no gun would do that. A good art director would understand, like, that is important message for the user. Hence we're designing weapons like they are not in real life. Or the same thing if they're coming in from the side, they're showing it on the side of the movies. Anyways, like there are certain details that only genre-specific art directors will understand, and the phase of your studio, the size of your studio, and the genre sets the bar. And that, of course, is a message that you push forward to the recruiters. But I would say that what I did is in early phases of a studio, I would definitely go on ArtStation. I would be looking at other games that have that type of a style that I would very much like us to follow, and trying to connect with art directors who have done those games, who have led those teams. And it is a little bit of an investigative process. Like usually if we had artists in our team at those points, we would give, I would ask them to look for that, because they're hiring their own managers. So ArtStation is a powerful tool, and it should be leveraged by executives because they know the type of game that they want. If you want somebody from Call of Duty, not that hard to find, hard to hire, but not that hard to find. Or Halo, or you name it. Like if it's a shooter project, the same thing goes with the puzzles. You can find people who have worked on King's games, etc. And then the other one is, if it's an earlier stage studio, you can also start looking at people who work at those games in those genres and see if they would be interested in taking a step up. They maybe been for a lead artist for a longer time in a big team of 50 artists or 70 artists, and they could now be interested in moving in as an art director in your studio, where there would be career step up. At those cases, of course, there has to be a lot of alignment. You have to give them coaching because they are stepping into new shoes. They are taking a new role. But nevertheless, that could be a very good investment in providing somebody a career advancement. In it's just career advancement. So
great. Thank you so much, Mishka. This was so much fun to talk about, and I'm echoing the same sentiments once again. But it's always so great to work with you, and always have the opportunity to work with you. So you're a great leader, and you provide a great landscape, not just to the art directors, but basically every craft. So it was so nice to know what you think about these things, and I hope that the audience finds it very valuable as well. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Shiraz. Just a correction: I'm not a great leader. I work well with certain people, and I work less well with others. And I think that is an important notion for anybody who's wanting to become an art director or who are working in the organization. Like, you have to find the type of teams and the type of leaders you enjoy working with, and that becomes really well. But equally, some other people will not like to work. Like, imagine there are some artists that didn't like work with Shiraz. I think that's crazy. But there were some. And that's totally normal because his ways of working may suit majority. And then some people say, no, I don't like that way of working. And they're not wrong. It's just an opinion. So, so I would just do that caveat on me, and just sorry for using you as an example, because I think you're widely recognized as one of the best art directors in mobile gaming. I would say definitely my favorite art director that I ever worked with. So yeah, thank you for your compliments.
Thank you so much for the kind words. Have a great day. Thank you.